Have you ever stepped onto a plane, settled into a first-class seat, yet still felt like you didn't belong? Have you ever been treated differently? Not because of how you dressed, not because you did anything wrong, but simply because of who you are. Helen Carter wasn't looking for trouble when she boarded that flight. She expected nothing more than what she deserved, the same respect as any other passenger. But what happened on that flight would reveal a chilling truth. A truth that many would rather keep hidden. At first, it was subtle, a lingering glance, a moment of hesitation while scanning her boarding pass, a fleeting look filled with quiet judgment. But soon, the discrimination became undeniable. A flight attendant moved through the cabin, greeting and serving passengers with a polite smile. But when she reached Helen, she walked right past her. No explanation, no menu. And when her meal finally arrived, it was carelessly placed before her. Sloppy, unremarkable, unlike any other meal in first class. They expected her to stay silent, to lower her head and accept it. But they didn't know Helen Carter. They had no idea they had just made a very big mistake. And they certainly didn't expect that, just a few hours later, one phone call from Helen would change everything, forever. Stay with us until the end, because this story isn't just about one woman. It's about an entire system. And today that system is about to be shaken awake. Helen stepped through the aircraft doors with the quiet confidence that had carried her through many rooms where she wasn't always welcome. First class unfolded before her, a world of luxury and refinement where every detail was designed for the elite. Plush leather seats, warm ambient lighting, the faint scent of sandalwood and fresh brewed espresso lingering in the air. This was a space reserved for those who could afford to pay thousands of dollars for absolute comfort. But Helen had long since learned. Money doesn't buy respect from everyone. She felt the shift in the atmosphere the moment she entered the cabin. A few passengers glanced up at her, then quickly looked away. A middle-aged man, immersed in his newspaper, furrowed his brows before flipping the page. A young woman took a slow sip of wine, eyes flicking toward Helen with an expression that wasn't curiosity, but rather an unspoken question. What is she doing here? Helen didn't react. She had seen it before, felt it before. She straightened the collar of her blazer, adjusted her bag on her shoulder, and walked calmly to her seat. 1A, first class, window side. As she approached, a blonde flight attendant stood in the aisle, her uniform crisp and perfectly pressed. Unlike the warm smiles she had given other passengers, her eyes lingered on Helen just a little too long. It wasn't surprise, it was evaluation. Helen kept her expression neutral, but she didn't miss the details. The blonde flight attendant shifted slightly to the side, allowing Helen to pass, but she didn't say, "Welcome aboard." She didn't even smile. There was a brief, almost imperceptible pause, a quiet message hanging in the air, as if to say, "You don't belong here." Helen didn't respond. She simply nodded, slid into her seat, and fastened her seatbelt without a word. As more passengers filled the first-class cabin, the atmosphere settled into a comfortable elegance, soft murmurs of conversation, the pop of champagne bottles, gentle laughter floating through the space. Everyone seemed at ease. Everyone except Helen. She pulled out her phone, scrolling quickly through her inbox. Work was always waiting. But Helen wasn't just another first-class passenger. She was a corporate ethics consultant, specializing in helping companies build inclusive, equitable work cultures. The irony was almost laughable, because at this very moment, she was sitting on a plane operated by one of the world's largest airlines, an airline that was about to sign a contract with her to improve its diversity and inclusion policies. And yet, right here on this very flight, she was about to witness firsthand exactly what they had been trying to hide. But what Helen didn't know was that this was just the beginning, and in a matter of hours, everything was about to change. Forever. Helen leaned back in her seat, forcing herself to relax. The flight would last a few hours, and she was used to making the most of her time in the air. But whether she wanted to or not, she could feel it. A quiet tension pressing around her, like an invisible force. No one said anything outright. No one did anything obvious. But exclusion had a way of making itself known. It was like a ripple in the air, subtle but unmistakable. And then it happened. From the front of the cabin, the blonde flight attendant, Catherine, began moving through the aisle, carrying a neat stack of first-class menus. Helen watched as she stopped at each row, handing them out one by one. A middle-aged man took his with a polite nod. A woman in a Chanel dress accepted hers with a soft smile, exchanging pleasantries. One by one, each passenger was served with warmth and courtesy. Catherine moved closer. Helen sat up slightly, ready to take her menu. And then, Catherine walked right past her. No pause, no explanation, nothing. Helen blinked. For a brief moment, she wondered if she had somehow missed something. But no, she hadn't. She had seen it clearly. The flight attendant had handed a menu to the man seated in front of her. Then, without hesitation, she had given another to the passenger behind her. And yet, she had completely skipped Helen. Helen looked up. "Excuse me, I haven't received a menu." Catherine turned around, her expression flickering. Surprise? Or maybe just pretend surprise. "Oh." She dragged out the word, her tone just a little too calculated, her smile just a little too forced. "We're running low on copies. I'll see if I can find one for you." A polite excuse, wrapped in a sickly sweet voice that didn't quite ring true. Then, without waiting for a response, she turned and walked away. Helen didn't say anything. She didn't need to, because inside her, a cold certainty settled in. It wasn't about the menu. It was about what it represented. She glanced around the first-class cabin, her gaze sweeping over the other passengers. Every single one of them had a menu in hand. Not a single other person had been overlooked. Helen inhaled deeply, straightening in her seat. This wasn't the first time she had experienced something like this. She had seen it before. She had lived it before. Hundreds of times. But this time, something was different. Maybe it was who she was now. Maybe it was because she knew this airline was about to partner with her to improve their own policies on equity and diversity. And yet, right here, in their own first-class cabin, she was watching them fail. The irony was bitter. Helen didn't make a scene. She didn't need to. She had learned patience. She had learned how to watch, how to wait, how to gather proof. If this flight attendant thought she could get away with it, she had just made a very big mistake. Because this was only the beginning. The air around Helen had changed. No one had said anything. No one had done anything obvious. But discrimination had a way of making itself known. And then, it happened. The blonde flight attendant, Catherine, appeared at the front of the cabin, a neat stack of first-class menus tucked under her arm. The menus were sleek, printed on luxurious paper, listing an array of exquisite dishes the airline proudly served. Helen watched as she moved down the aisle, her voice smooth, polished, practiced. "Good evening, sir. Here's tonight's dinner menu. Thank you for flying with us. We have some wonderful selections for you today." One by one, passengers accepted their menus with small nods of approval. A distinguished gentleman with silver-streaked hair lifted his menu with interest, his brow arching as he skimmed the fine wine list. A woman in an elegant Chanel dress smiled as Catherine leaned in, whispering a personal recommendation. The service was impeccable, warm, attentive. Catherine continued her way down the cabin, closer to Helen now. Helen lifted her gaze, readying her hand to receive a menu. But then, Catherine walked right past her. No pause, no explanation, no menu. It was as if Helen didn't exist. The moment stretched longer than it should have. No one said a word. But Helen felt it. Clear, unmistakable, silence. Not just in the cabin, but within her. Her heartbeat slowed. Her breath deepened. A cold realization settled over her. "Excuse me." Helen's voice was calm, steady, unwavering. Catherine stopped. A hesitation, small but telling. She turned, her expression almost one of surprise, as if Helen wasn't supposed to say anything at all. "Oh," a slight falter. Then she smiled, but it wasn't real. "We're running low on copies. I'll see if I can find one for you." Her voice was too sweet to be sincere. Then, before Helen could respond, Catherine turned and walked away. This time, Helen didn't need to ask. She already knew. Every other passenger in first class had a menu in hand. So it was deliberate. Helen had been intentionally ignored. She inhaled slowly, straightening her posture, her eyes still tracking Catherine as she moved effortlessly through the cabin, distributing menus without hesitation. Helen didn't need a menu to understand what had just happened. But what caught her attention even more than Catherine's actions was the silence in the first-class cabin. She glanced at the passengers around her. No one said anything. No one spoke up. No one asked why. A few passengers stole quick glances at her before hurriedly turning away. The middle-aged man, seated across from her, hesitated for a few seconds, looking visibly uncomfortable. Then, quietly folded his menu, as if closing it would somehow remove him from the situation. The silence. Helen had seen it before. It wasn't just indifference. It was fear. Fear that if they acknowledged what had just happened, they might have to do something about it. Fear that if they spoke up, they might be pulled into something they didn't want to be part of. Helen didn't blame them, but she also didn't accept their silence. She set her phone down on the glossy tray table, her fingers tapping lightly against the smooth surface. No one was going to stand up for her, so she would do it herself. This time, Helen wasn't going to let it slide. Helen sat still, her back resting against the plush first-class seat, her gaze calm but alert, taking in every detail around her. She didn't react right away, not because she intended to let it go, but because she wanted to watch. She wanted to see it unfold. This wasn't the first time she had been treated this way. But there was one key difference. This time, she wasn't just another passenger. Minutes passed. Catherine, the blonde flight attendant, continued to serve with effortless grace, attending to passengers with a charm that seemed almost rehearsed. A middle-aged man ordered a glass of red wine, and Catherine immediately suggested a fine French selection, her voice dripping with honeyed warmth. A young woman in a designer dress inquired about the appetizers, and Catherine leaned down, whispering a detailed, personalized recommendation. The service was flawless. For everyone but Helen. Helen didn't miss a thing. She looked down at her hands, empty. No menu. Nothing. Outside, the engines hummed steadily as the plane reached cruising altitude. The cabin lights dimmed slightly, settling into a warm glow. Flight attendants moved through the aisles, preparing for dinner service. Still, no one had returned to her. No explanation. No apology. Just complete disregard. Helen glanced at the clock on the screen in front of her. 12 minutes. 12 minutes since Catherine had promised to find an extra menu. She hadn't forgotten. She had never intended to return. Helen pressed the call button. A soft beep echoed above her, and a small light flickered on the cabin ceiling. A moment later, another flight attendant appeared. A younger woman with dark brown hair pulled into a neat bun. "Good evening, ma'am. How can I assist you?" Her voice was polite, but there was a flicker of hesitation in her eyes as she met Helen's gaze. Helen held her stare steady. "I still haven't received my menu." The flight attendant blinked, looking around briefly, almost as if hoping to spot an easy excuse. "Oh, let me check on that for you." She turned away a little too quickly, a subtle but telling reaction. Helen took a slow, measured breath. 15 seconds later, Catherine returned. This time, there was no forced politeness, no fake sweetness, just thinly veiled irritation. "I already told you, we're running low on menus." Her voice was clipped, cold, tight with impatience. Helen tilted her head slightly, her gaze unwavering. "Then why does everyone else have one?" In that moment, a silent tension hung between them. Catherine parted her lips as if to say something, but then she stopped. Helen didn't look away. "I don't care about the menu anymore," Helen said, her voice calm but sharp as steel. "But I want to know why I was the only one who didn't get one." Catherine hesitated for a few seconds, just long enough to confirm what Helen already knew. Then her demeanor shifted. She squared her shoulders, her posture stiffening as she attempted to reclaim control. "I can bring your meal right now." Her voice was clipped, not accommodating, but defensive. Helen didn't move. No. Her tone didn't rise, she didn't push, but she didn't back down either. "I want to be treated like every other passenger." A quiet but undeniable assertion. The silence between them stretched just a little too long. Then, without another word, Catherine took a sharp breath, turned on her heel, and walked away. She didn't apologize. She didn't promise to fix it. She just left. Helen watched her go, her gaze steady, unwavering. This wasn't over. She leaned back into her seat, her eyes following Catherine as she disappeared to the back of the cabin. A quiet moment, but one heavy with meaning. Helen didn't need anyone to spell it out for her. She knew exactly what was happening. The other passengers continued their meals as if nothing had happened. Wine glasses were topped off. Appetizers were served with elegant descriptions. The soft clink of silverware against fine china blended into hushed conversations between strangers who shared a common privilege. But to Helen, first class had never felt so small. She looked down at the tray in front of her. No menu, no introductions to the dishes, just a plate carelessly placed before her, a meal that looked nothing like the ones on the tables around her. Slowly, she pushed the tray away. "Excuse me." Helen looked up, a quiet voice, hesitant. The woman seated 2 rows ahead turned toward her, uncertain but watching. "I saw what happened." Her voice was barely audible over the low hum of the aircraft engines. "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry for what you're going through." Helen held her gaze for a moment. Then she nodded. "Thank you." Her voice was soft but not entirely accepting, because a stranger's apology didn't change the reality of what had just happened. It didn't erase the dismissal, the silent humiliation. But at the very least, it confirmed one thing. She wasn't imagining this. She wasn't exaggerating. It was real, and it was happening. Helen inhaled deeply, her fingers grazing her phone. Her patience had run out. She pulled up her contacts, scrolling to a familiar name. Jonathan Marks, CEO of the airline. She had worked with him before. She knew exactly what kind of man he was. A pragmatist, but one who understood the value of reputation. Helen didn't call right away. Timing mattered more than action. She wasn't just going to report what happened. She was going to make sure it couldn't be ignored. Every move had to be calculated. She took another glance around the cabin. Catherine continued serving the other passengers with practiced politeness, never sparing Helen so much as a glance. In front of her, a man took a sip of his red wine, laughing at something the flight attendant said. Further ahead, another passenger beamed as their gourmet dessert was placed in front of them. None of them had been overlooked. None of them had been made to feel like they didn't belong. Only her. Helen leaned forward. She picked up her phone. Her thumb hovered over the name in her contacts. Then, without hesitation, she tapped it. And this time she pressed call. Helen raised the phone to her ear, her expression calm, but inside her a storm was building. The dial tone rang. Once, twice, 3 times. And then, "Helen, I wasn't expecting a call from you mid-flight. Is everything all right?" Jonathan Marks, CEO of the airline, answered, his voice clear, steady. He wasn't easily rattled, but there was a hint of surprise in his tone, because he knew Helen never called without a reason. Helen leaned back into her seat, her voice calm, sharp, unmistakable. "Jonathan, we have a serious problem, and it's happening right now on your airline." A brief pause on the other end. Then, "I'm listening." Jonathan's tone shifted, lower, more serious. Helen laid it out for him. Every detail. From the silent judgment the moment she stepped onto the plane, to being skipped over for the menu, the deliberate lack of service, the way the flight attendant had gone out of her way to make her feel like she didn't belong. She didn't need to exaggerate. The truth spoke for itself. On the other end of the line, Jonathan inhaled sharply. Helen could hear the shift in his breathing, the subtle frustration in his silence. Not at her, at what was happening. "I can't believe this," Jonathan muttered, his voice tight with irritation. Helen didn't respond right away. She wanted him to think. She wanted him to feel the weight of what was happening. And then his voice changed. From anger to something else. Resolve. "I'm handling this, right now." Helen allowed herself a small smile. "Good. I hope your actions are as swift as your words." A beat of silence. Then Jonathan responded, firm and unwavering. "You have my word." Helen ended the call. She placed her phone down on the tray table in front of her, her gaze fixed straight ahead. Beside her, Catherine continued serving passengers with the same polite smile, as if she believed this was over. She had no idea this was only the beginning. Helen sat back, her expression calm. But inside, the tide was shifting. She didn't need to say another word. She didn't need to make another call. She only needed to wait. And she didn't have to wait long. Less than 10 minutes later, a ripple of movement spread through first class. From the back of the cabin, a man strode forward with purpose. A senior flight supervisor. He was middle-aged, with salt and pepper hair, and the practiced professionalism of someone who had been in the industry for years. He leaned toward another flight attendant, whispering something in hushed but urgent tones. Then, his eyes flickered briefly across the passengers and landed on Catherine. Helen didn't need to hear what was being said. She already knew. From her seat, she saw it happen. The way Catherine's body tensed ever so slightly. A single moment of hesitation. Then, without argument, without question, she turned and followed the supervisor toward the back of the plane. She didn't look back. Not once. She didn't speak. She didn't offer an explanation. She simply disappeared. A brief silence settled over first class. The other passengers felt the shift, even if they didn't understand it. Some glanced around, sensing something had changed. Others continued their meals, pretending not to notice. But Helen? She noticed everything. But Helen knew. Everyone had noticed that something wasn't right. She remained in her seat, her expression calm, her posture unchanged, but she was watching, closely. A few minutes later, another flight attendant appeared beside her, a younger woman, her face tense with unease. "Miss Carter, my name is Megan Hall. I'm a flight attendant on this flight." Her voice was soft, but tinged with nervousness. "We sincerely apologize for what happened." Helen studied Megan for a moment. "So, now you know what happened?" Megan blinked, hesitating for a second, then nodded. "Yes, and I want to assure you that from this point forward, you will receive the service you deserve." Helen didn't respond immediately. She looked at Megan, younger, uncertain, someone who had never been in a situation like this before. She wasn't Catherine. She wasn't the one who had caused this. But she had stood by and watched. Helen's voice was measured. "All right." Megan nodded quickly and stepped away, relieved to retreat from the conversation. Helen didn't need apologies anymore. She needed action. Not long after Catherine had disappeared from first class, the tension in the cabin began to build. The remaining flight attendants tried to carry on as if nothing had happened. But Helen noticed the shifts, the flickers of unease in their glances, the silent exchanges between them, heavy with unspoken understanding. Helen didn't say anything. She didn't need to. She wasn't in a hurry, because she knew. This wasn't over. And just as Helen had expected, 10 minutes later, a senior flight attendant appeared. Not Megan. Someone higher up. She was a middle-aged woman with an air of authority, her dark hair neatly pinned back, her uniform crisp and precise. She stopped beside Helen, standing with practiced professionalism, but her movements held a tension she couldn't quite hide. "Miss Carter, my name is Linda Reynolds. I'm the lead flight attendant on this flight." Her voice was low, firm, but there was a slight hesitation beneath it. Helen looked up, her gaze calm, but unyielding. Linda continued, her tone careful, more defensive than concerned. "Is there something I can assist you with?" Helen slowly set her napkin down on the table, never breaking eye contact. "I think the better question is, do you know what happened?" Linda blinked. "We understand there was an issue with service." "An issue?" Helen raised an eyebrow. "Then maybe you can explain why I was the only passenger who didn't receive a menu, why my meal looked nothing like the others, why I was treated like I didn't exist." The air in first class grew heavier. Passengers nearby pretended not to listen, but Helen knew. They were paying attention. Linda hesitated for a brief moment before clearing her throat. "I sincerely apologize if you feel dissatisfied with your experience." Helen smiled. A cold, humorless smile. "I don't feel dissatisfied. I witnessed a clear act of discrimination." Linda's shoulders stiffened. The word discrimination was never an easy one to hear, especially in the service industry. "Miss Carter, I assure you, this matter will be investigated properly." "No need." Helen cut her off. Her tone remained calm, but it was undeniable. "I already did that for you." She reached for her phone, pulled up her notes, then met Linda's gaze head-on. "I have the exact timestamps of every event. I have the names of every crew member involved. I have witnesses." Linda took a slight step back, but she tried to maintain her composure. "I'll be reporting this to my superiors." "No need," Helen repeated, her voice sharper this time. "I've already spoken directly to your CEO. He's fully aware of the situation." Linda froze. For the first time, she looked genuinely unsettled. "You already spoke to him?" "That's right," Helen nodded. "And I assure you, when this plane lands, there will be people waiting to deal with this." The direct hit. Helen could see it. The precise moment Linda realized how serious this had become. She wasn't in control anymore. Helen had changed the game. Linda took a slow breath, then gave a curt nod. "I'll make sure you receive the standard of service you deserve for the rest of the flight." Helen tilted her head slightly. Her expression remained unchanged. "I'll make sure that from now on, Every passenger, regardless of skin color or status, receives that same standard. Linda said nothing. She turned and walked away quickly, decisively. Helen leaned back into her seat and took a slow sip of water. Her work on this flight was done. But the fight? The fight wasn't over. Helen gazed out the window as the plane began its descent, the city lights below spreading out like a shimmering web against the night sky. A breathtaking view, but in her mind, the battle wasn't finished. The silence in first class felt different now. It was no longer ignorance, no longer apathy. It was tension. It was awareness. The remaining flight attendants now served her with an overcompensating politeness, an almost unnatural level of attentiveness, as if trying to erase what had happened. But Helen didn't need forced courtesy. She didn't want a better meal. Helen didn't need last-minute apologies. She wanted real change. She glanced down at her phone, where a new message from Jonathan Marks had just appeared. Jonathan Marks? I've alerted my management team. I'll meet you as soon as you land. Helen smiled, just slightly. They were worried. They knew this couldn't be ignored. A chime echoed through the cabin as the captain's voice came over the speakers, announcing their final descent. Passengers adjusted their seatbelts, folding up their entertainment screens. A few stole glances in Helen's direction, but none of them dared to hold eye contact for more than a second. And then, the plane touched down, a smooth but firm landing. As the aircraft slowed to a stop on the runway, an invisible sense of anticipation filled first class. No one said anything, but everyone knew. Something had shifted. Helen didn't rush to stand. She took one last look around. What happened on this flight would not be forgotten. Not by her, and certainly not by this airline. Helen stepped out of first class with absolute composure, but her gaze was sharp as a blade. Passengers gathered their belongings, filing off the plane like it was any other flight. But for Helen, this was not just another flight. Because she wasn't just stepping off a plane, she was stepping into a much bigger fight. As she passed through the jet bridge and entered the arrival terminal, a well-dressed man in a sharp black suit was already waiting. Miss Carter, I'm Michael, Mr. Marks' assistant. The CEO is expecting you. Helen wasn't surprised. She had seen this coming. With a nod, she followed Michael through the VIP lounge, a sleek, private space reserved for the airline's most elite passengers. The doors to the meeting room swung open, and immediately she knew. This wasn't just a routine conversation. Jonathan Marks was already there. A seasoned businessman, always exuding control. But tonight, he didn't look so confident. Beside him sat Chloe Bennett, the head of human resources, along with a team of senior executives. They were prepared. Helen didn't take her seat right away. She stood there for a moment, letting the silence speak for itself. The tension, the unease, and the unspoken truth. They knew she wasn't here for empty apologies. Jonathan was the first to rise. Helen, first and foremost, I want to offer my deepest apologies. What happened on our flight was completely unacceptable. Helen finally sat down, crossing her arms. Her response was direct. So what are you going to do about it? A simple question. But it cut straight through the pretense. Jonathan exchanged a glance with Chloe. She exhaled slightly, then reached for a stack of documents, sliding them across the table. We launched an internal review immediately after your call. This is what we found. Helen picked up the file and flipped through the pages. Catherine Ellis, terminated. 2 other crew members, who witnessed but failed to intervene, also dismissed. Helen looked up. And what about your system? Jonathan let out a slow breath. We know this wasn't an isolated incident, and we can't allow it to keep happening. Chloe leaned forward. We've allocated funding for a company-wide diversity and equity training program, not just for flight attendants, but for all airline employees. She hesitated for a moment, then continued, and we want you to be the lead consultant for this initiative. Helen leaned back in her chair. This was the moment she had been waiting for. Not just punishing individuals, but changing a system. She met Jonathan's gaze head-on. I'll do it. But on one condition. Jonathan nodded, his expression serious. Name it. Helen placed the file down on the table, her eyes never leaving him. I don't work with companies that only want to clean up their mess to avoid a scandal. If you're not truly committed to change, I won't put my name on any project of yours. The room fell into absolute silence. Jonathan studied her for a long moment. Then, Slowly, deliberately, he nodded. You have my word. Helen smiled, just slightly. Good, then let's begin. She stood, taking the file with her. Justice isn't just an apology, it's action. I hope you remember that. Jonathan nodded once more. Helen turned and walked out, leaving behind an institution shaken to its core. And she knew this wouldn't be the last time she had to fight this fight. Helen stepped out of the airline's corporate office, her pace steady, her focus clear. She didn't rush, she didn't look back. A cool breeze brushed against her skin, bringing a moment of lightness, but not satisfaction. She had won this battle. But this fight was never just about her. As night fell, the city stretched before her, glittering with thousands of lights. Yet in that glow, Helen knew there were still too many places left in darkness. Places where discrimination was still happening, quietly, invisibly, but no less damaging. She couldn't change the world in one flight. But she could force those in power to listen. She could hold the door open for others to step through. She could set a precedent so that those who had ever been made to feel invisible would know they weren't alone. Her phone vibrated, a message from an unknown number. I was a passenger near you on the flight. Thank you for standing up. You didn't just fight for yourself, you fought for so many others. We saw it, and we appreciate it. Helen stared at the screen for a long moment. Then, slowly, she smiled. This was why she never stopped. Helen's story wasn't just a personal experience. It was a powerful reminder that silence never brings change, but speaking up can. We followed Helen through every moment of that flight. The injustice, the quiet, simmering anger, and finally, the victory of accountability. But remember, there are still countless Helens out there. They could be the person you see in an upscale restaurant. They could be the person sitting next to you on your morning commute. They could be you. And the real question is, when that moment happens, will you stand up? Or will you stay silent? If this story made you think, if it moved you, help spread its message. Hit the like button so more people can see it. Share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever witnessed an unfair situation like this? What would you do? And most importantly, subscribe to Aiva Stories so you never miss another inspiring story. Thank you for watching. And remember, every great change starts with one person who dares to stand up. See you in the next story.